Hi there, my name is Chris McKittrick, and today I'm going to be talking to you about hypermiling. Now, a lot of you might be saying, what is hypermiling? Well, what it is a sequence of small events that we can incorporate into our daily driving techniques. It's going to help reduce fuel consumption and be better for the wear and tear of your car. Now, there's a lot of obvious things we consider. We can live closer to where we work, we can drive less, we can walk, or we can take public transit. But today I want to share a few techniques that we can implement while behind the wheel and things to look at on the outside of your car. If you take a look in your back seat, if you take a look in your trunk, there's probably a lot of stuff in there that doesn't need to be there. All this extra weight, it costs money to move, it doesn't travel for free, and this extra weight increases your fuel consumption. Get rid of it. Looking on the outside of your car, you might have a roof rack, you might have a vehicle or a bicycle rack on there. Aesthetically pleasing perhaps, but if you're not using it, not very functional. Get rid of it. It actually creates aerodynamic drag on the vehicle. And as I said, over the course of a year, over the course of a tank of gas, it does add up. The small things to consider. Another important thing is to look at your tires. Make sure that the tire pressure is fully inflated to manufacturer's specifications. And actually some hypermilers actually like to overinflate their tires, and what this does is helps reduce friction with the road. Other things is to actually consider is as the temperature begins to drop outside and as the seasons are changing, the tire pressure begins to drop with the temperature. Keep an eye on that. Now, things to look at behind the wheel. There's quite a few. Get in the habit of keeping a log of when you go to the gas station. Keep the receipts and write down the mileage used. Some cars may be equipped with a monitor that can do this, or you can actually pick one up at your local hardware store. Keep a habit and write down new techniques that you've used while driving in different areas that you're using them. It's also really important to drive with anticipation. Now, what I mean by that is stop and go driving, it's not economical. I like to relate it to riding a bicycle. You're not going to pedal as hard as you can to be the first to get to a red light. Look ahead, think one light, two lights ahead. Very important. Now that I'm driving, I'm on the highway, I like to actually consider coasting. Shift the car into neutral and just let the momentum you've already built continue to do the work. When you're driving downhill, you don't need to have your foot on the gas that much. The momentum is going to continue for you. If you do opt to actually turn the ignition off, of course you're not going to be using any fuel, but it's really important because if we do that, we're going to lose some of the luxuries that we've become accustomed to. Power steering is gone, power braking is gone, and my next point is it's really important to actually know your route and know your itinerary. Because if you're driving somewhere that you're not familiar with and you're turning, as soon as I turn the ignition back on, my wheels, my power steering, my power brakes are back and forth, and I'm using them once again. So it's really important to know where you're going and know your itinerary because you can actually plan your route a lot better. Another thing to consider is, now that I'm in my driveway, it's a bit of a slick driveway, before I turn the ignition off, I'm actually just going to shift the car into neutral and let it coast down the hill. I don't need to have the... Hello, my name is Chris McKittrick, and today I'm going to be talking to you about hypermiling. Now, some of you may be saying, what is hypermiling? Well, what it is a series of small changes that we can implement over a tank of gas that will make a significant difference in fuel consumption. Now, there's some obvious techniques we can implement, such as drive less, we can walk to work, or take public transit. But today I want to give you a few more ideas that we can implement while behind the wheel, and some things we can do on the outside of the vehicle. For instance, a very important thing is remove unnecessary clutter from the vehicle. All this extra weight in the vehicle doesn't need to be there, and it does take energy to move. Get rid of it. The other things we consider is if your vehicle has a roof rack or a bicycle rack and you're not using it, get rid of it. And what this will do is help reduce the aerodynamic drag on your vehicle. Other things to consider is make sure your fluids under the hood are fully topped up, and make sure that your tire pressure is full to manufacturer specifications. It's also important to know that as the temperature begins to drop, so does the pressure in your tires. Keep an eye on it. Some hypermilers actually like to overinflate their tires, and what this does is helps reduce friction with the road. Some things to consider when in the vehicle. Make a habit of keeping your fuel receipts from your gas stations and keep a log of different routes that you take. Why this is important? Well, I'll get to that in just one second. It's also really important to drive with anticipation. Why? Well, I like to think of it as riding a bicycle. You're not going to pedal as hard as you can to be the first to get to a red light. Stop and go driving is bad for the economy and bad for fuel consumption. Some vehicles may have it installed This type of product you can also pick up at your local hardware store, and that's a fuel usage monitor. Some hypermilers I also like to suggest starting from a coast or in a rolling position. You can see right now I'm actually parked on an angle. Before I even turn the ignition on, I'm going to shift the car into neutral and roll out of the driveway before anything has even happened. While driving, I was mentioning earlier, it's really important to know your itinerary. The reason is you can get to know different techniques you can use, where you can coast and where you shouldn't be. Some hypermilers even suggest to actually turn the ignition off and let the car run in neutral. I'll get back to why it's important to know your route. When you do turn the ignition off, you're going to lose the luxury that we've become accustomed to, which is the power steering and power brakes. It's going to take a lot more effort to actually turn the steering wheel. If I'm driving in an unfamiliar area, I turn the ignition on, all of a sudden I'm turning a lot more quicker, and it can be dangerous. These are just a few techniques that I'd like to share with you today that I hope you can also use to implement with fuel consumption. Hello, my name is Chris McKittrick. Today I'm going to be talking to you about hypermiling. Now some of you may be saying, what is hypermiling? Well, what it is, it's a series of small techniques that we can implement over a full tank of gas that will actually help reduce fuel consumption and be better for the economy and your car. Now there's a couple obvious techniques we can implement. We can drive less, we can walk to work, we can live closer to work, or we can take public transit. But today I want to share with you a couple new ideas that you can actually implement while behind the wheel, and as well things you can look at on the outside of the car. Important. There's a lot of stuff in your car. I'm sure if you go into the trunk, you're going to see some stuff that doesn't need to be there. This extra weight, pull it out. It takes energy to move. It doesn't need to be there. All season's over. Other things to consider, your car may have a roof rack or a bicycle rack. It may look nice, but if you're not using it, get rid of it. Reduce that aerodynamic drag on the vehicle. Also make sure your fluids are topped up under the hood, but really important, make sure that your tires are fully inflated to the manufacturer specifications. It's important to know that as the temperature begins to drop, so does the pressure inside the tires. And also, actually, some hypermilers actually like to overinflate their tires, and what this does is help reduce the friction with the road. Some things you can do once you're inside the vehicle, this is where it really counts. Make a habit of keeping the receipts from the gas station. Keep a logbook in there and write down where you went, different techniques you use, so you can learn what works and what doesn't work. Now some techniques that I like to use and that other hypermilers like to use is when you're driving at speed, you can actually shift the car into neutral, especially when you're going downhill. It doesn't take that much energy to actually hit the gas pedal. You don't need to. The car will continue its momentum. Others I actually like to suggest actually turn the ignition off. This is a good way. Of course, you're not burning any fuel, but as soon as you do that, you're going to lose some of those things we've come accustomed to, and that's your power steering and your power brake. See, it takes a lot more energy to actually turn the wheel. And if you're actually turning, this is why it's really important to know what route you're taking, because if you're doing this and you turn the ignition on, all of a sudden you can turn the car a lot more easily. It's also really important to drive with anticipation. Look ahead, think 1 stoplight, 2 stoplight, 3 stoplights ahead. I like to actually think of it as riding a bicycle. You're not going to be pedaling as hard as you can to be the first to get to a red light. It doesn't make sense. Drive with anticipation. Stop and go isn't good for the economy, it isn't good for your car, and it helps reduce some fuel consumption. Again, these are just a few ideas you can implement. Other things is, you can see I've actually parked on a bit of a slope. Before I pull out of my driveway, I'm just going to turn the car into neutral before I turn the ignition off and just roll out. Small things you can start picking up on as you go. Before you reach the apex of a hill, accelerate and then decelerate by shifting the car into neutral and coasting down the hill. Lots of new ideas, lots of research to be done. Again, these are just a few ideas. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.